Hello, and welcome back to another episode of An Amber a Day, the Functional Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Amber Fisher, and I believe this is episode 38. Don't quote me on it. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. And today we are going to be we're going to be continuing the series that I've started on PCOS. So today we're talking about the 4 different types of PCOS and kind of some of the indicators of these different types. So stay tuned if you want to hear different, symptoms and see which types kind of sounds more like you. I always have to give the disclaimer that this is not, medical advice. This is for educational purposes only. And obviously you should always consult your doctor, your nutritionist, and the people that are helping you for individualized advice. Okay. But I do feel and have always felt like I really struggled when I was first diagnosed with PCOS to find information and to find it in a way that was like laid out to where I could understand it, because oftentimes, you're not born knowing about PCOS, so you don't learn anything about it until you're diagnosed with it. And then, you start this frantic process of like trying to gather information, right? And it's hard to put all that together. And so, those of you who have been listening to me for a while, or those of you who are picking up listening to me here, my style is to treat women like they're smart, like they're adults, because I believe that, women are intelligent and can understand these scientific concepts and are interested in knowing the deeper things going on inside of themselves. And so I'm speaking from that place, but trying to do it in a way to where we build on the information and, you learn a lot through the process. So hopefully I'm accomplishing that. If you have never listened to a podcast with me before, you might want to go back to last week when I started this series, talking about when you're first diagnosed with PCOS and, some stuff about that. But today is a really informative podcast because we're going to talk about the different types. So if you're here for that, and you don't care about me as a person, you might want to skip ahead about 5-10 minutes, because I always start off the podcast by updating my fans and friends on how I'm doing and what's going on with me. So let's do that, shall we? Okay, so what's going on right now with me, besides just the normal stuff, is I'm really excited because next week I am starting, or actually at the time that this podcast comes out, it will already have happened, but I am starting my first conference for my IFMCP certification. So what is IFMCP? I mentioned this before in a previous podcast, but the Institute for Functional Medicine has a certification program that doctors, nutritionists, naturopaths, acupuncturists, different health professionals can go through to become certified in functional medicine. And the Institute for Functional Medicine is sort of the overseeing body for the majority of the functional medicine work that happens worldwide. There's no one specific agency that can say we are the only ones who do functional medicine. So there's that. But the IFM is kind of a big deal. They're recognized as being, a big, important organization. And there are some practitioners in San Antonio who are IFM certified. And I have always wanted to do this, always. Since when I started the process of becoming a nutritionist, it was always in my mind that one day I wanted to be an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. So I'm excited because I didn't know at the time that was not open to non-RD nutritionists. So there are, different types of nutritionists out there, and I am not a registered dietitian. I followed an alternative pathway. So at the time that I got licensed as a certified nutrition specialist, the IFM wasn't accepting CNSs, certified nutrition specialists, into their program, but that has since changed a few years ago because they recognized the rigorous nature of the CNS credential. And so CNSs are the only other credentialed nutritionists besides registered dietitians with a master's degree that can get this certification. So it's kind of a big deal. And I'm really excited about it. And I'm mostly excited about it because I am excited to have an even more in-depth understanding of functional medicine principles. My master's degree is in functional medicine, but let's be honest, I graduated with that in 2017, and it was a good program, but I didn't feel like I got as much functional nutrition knowledge as I wanted to throughout that process. So I'm excited to continue expanding on that. I'm a huge person into like my own research, and I like to read the studies and things like that. So this is exciting for me. So I start that on March 1st, and I'm going to be doing that for that whole week. And this first conference is putting functional medicine into practice. So it's talking about like business models and methods of organizing functional medicine work so that it's more standardized across the board and everything. So I'm excited to be part of this big group of highly intelligent, thoughtful professionals. And it's going to take me a long time to finish the credential, probably a few years, because there are several different steps to this, but this is the first step, and it's exciting to get started. So that's kind of what's up. That's what's up with me. What else? I don't want to waste time. Oh, here's what's up with me. I think I mentioned this last week, but I also have joined the children on TikTok. For those of you who don't know, I'm 32 years old, and I am a millennial, shall we say? And so I was one of those people that was like, what's TikTok? Like, it's just kids like lip syncing, right? No, it's a great platform to share educational content in little 60-second bites. You can get a lot of information out there, and it's actually been really fun for me because I'm historically long-winded. That's one reason I have the podcast, because on here I don't have to limit myself and say, oh, okay, I'm going to be more concise. So the podcast is really fun because it's just like whatever's in my head coming out, right? But TikTok has forced me to sort of get to organize my thoughts a little bit more and put them in sequential order. And I think that's a good mental exercise for me. It's preparing me for, the books that I am writing. Little teaser there. Yes, I am writing a book. So, it's just helping me be more concise. My journalism professor in college would be proud. That was my first major in college. Just a little side story. My first major in college was journalism, and I always got really high marks on like long form content, especially if it was like fiction or, it's supposed to be like, I forget what they call it, but those human interest pieces. Okay. So when you're just like going into depth on a certain topic and you don't have to be like super, super concise, I always got great grades on that. But like typical journalistic stuff, like a little, news piece about, I don't know, something random, I did not do great at those because I just have trouble with that. Like I have so much to say. So anyway, he would be proud. But yeah, and if you guys keep seeing me doing this, it's because there's like one ridiculous piece of hair that's just like right in my eye, but I can't find it. Have you ever experienced that? That is so frustrating. So I'm going to try not to do that too much because I'm sure that's really annoying to watch. For those of you watching on YouTube, hello. Thank you for watching me. All right. So why don't we go ahead and let's get into today's topic. Shall we? Okay. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about the 4 different types of PCOS. So, okay, here's my caveat with this. And I just want to mention that obviously I have PCOS. I've been learning about PCOS for the last more than a decade. I've been working with women with PCOS for around 6 years at this point. And so I have a lot of experience working with PCOS. And I've seen the gamut of different things. And I've never been more convinced than I am now that PCOS really is just a basket diagnosis. Like, yes, there are a lot of things that tie these different groups together. And there's certain underpinnings that are across the board for PCOS. But it's definitely something that we don't know enough about. And I have a feeling, and this is not scientific, but my feeling is that eventually, as we gather more data, we're going to realize that PCOS is really multiple separate syndromes that have similar results, but are coming from different, places. So genetic things, trauma PTSD places, impacts of weight, impacts of insulin. I already see this in practice where there are different types of women with PCOS. And I'm not just talking about the four, the clinical, the phenotypes or the clinical, distinctions that we use to kind of categorize women. But I'm talking about within women who, for example, might seem like insulin resistant PCOS people, there is so much difference between those women and between the outcomes that they potentially can get, whether they, are doing the same amount of work or not. So there's definitely more to it than we know at this point. And I like to be upfront with that because I really despise it when people act like we know everything there is to know about PCOS and like, oh, it's just a very simple thing. You just need to eat a low glycemic diet and blah, 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 and you can resolve your symptoms. Well, yeah, okay, that works for some women. It does. But there's a group of us who have much more complex types of PCOS, and even if we do everything right, we may still deal with symptoms of this throughout life. So I think it's important to know as much as you can, and to do your best to tackle it in any way that you can. But it's important to remember that, yeah, there's no cure for this. It's not this easy process that's like step 1, 2, 3, take omega-3s and then you won't have PCOS anymore. And that's one reason why historically, like, social media has always kind of annoyed me, and why I haven't been as present on there until recently, is because I resent this need to make everything into like a cutesy soundbite. And so, my TikTok videos, like, they're highly educational. I'm trying to pack as much information as I can into 60 seconds. I get annoyed at this whole thing of like, let's make it funny, right? Like, let's make it funny. Let's make an Instagram reel and say like, take zinc, take omega-3s, eat low carb, cut out dairy, solve your PCOS. For those of you listening, you didn't get to see that cool little reel that I made for y'all, but I did the pointing. So I get annoyed at that. I get really, really annoyed at that. And that's one reason why I haven't done that stuff, because it's just like, I don't even know how to put my thoughts into something like that. Like, I don't even know how to make PCOS funny. Like, there's a dark humor to it, right? Like, if you've been suffering with PCOS your whole life, like, there's some stuff that we can all bond about and laugh about. Sure. Like, you gotta laugh or you're gonna cry, right? But it's also this like it's this flippancy that some people have about PCOS that, it's like, yeah, okay, that gets you good engagement or views or whatever, because people, like just something to just kind of like put a heart on, but it doesn't make a difference. Like, it doesn't change anybody's life. It doesn't help people. And my main thing is like, I want to really help, because when I first had this, there was no help for this. So wow, I got myself on a soapbox. I may cut that out, or I might keep it. Or I might keep it for my Patreons. Speaking of, did you guys know that I have a Patreon now? I have a little community with like super secret special stuff. So, there's a link in the description box below if you want to join my community. But yeah, let's talk about the 4 types of PCOS, because here I've gone on a rant now. And you're probably like, okay, Amber, get to it. Let's find the 4 types. So what are they? The first type is the insulin resistant type. And then we've got the second type, which is the inflammation-based type. The third type, which is the adrenal type. And then the fourth type, which is the post-birth control type. So I'm going to go briefly into each one of these, and then in future episodes, we're going to do more in-depth work on each one and talk about my experiences of what this looks like in practice, how we can make changes to it, et cetera, et cetera. So the first type, the insulin-resistant type, by far the most common. Okay, so we know that around 10% of women or so have PCOS. It's the most common gynecological condition in the developed world. And so it's very, very common. A lot of women have it. And a lot of women develop it via this insulin-resistant issue. The insulin resistance, symptoms of that would be getting weak and shaky between meals, having these blood sugar drops. That's an indicator of that. Being really fatigued, getting dark patches. There's something called acanthosis nigricans, which is this darkening of the back of the neck and the elbows. And that's oftentimes a symptom of insulin resistance. Prediabetes, obviously, type 2 diabetes, obviously, metabolic syndrome. So this kind of carrying excess body fat in the middle. And you'll find that a lot of women who do have the insulin resistant part of PCOS, which I should mention that even if you're part of one of the other types, across the board, insulin resistance is part of the problem of PCOS. So it's upwards of 80% of women with PCOS, no matter where they fall in the BMI range, are insulin resistant. With that said too, insulin resistance is not always this very obvious thing. If you have your blood glucose levels drawn, it's not going to show that you're insulin resistant unless it's already progressed to the point where it's getting close to, prediabetes, diabetes. And at that point, it takes a while to get there. So that's important to keep in mind. A lot of women with PCOS have this hyperinsulinemia, this excessive insulin that's being produced, but they don't have any real symptoms unless the right tests are being run. What's a cool test is to check your fasting insulin, right? Or to check your postprandial insulin and see how you deal with insulin before and after meals. But that's hard blood work to get your hands on. So very common in PCOS. It's really one of the hallmarks of PCOS is this insulin resistance, and it affects women no matter where they are on the BMI scale. So you see thin women with PCOS with insulin resistance, you see overweight women with insulin resistance, and everyone in between. And that's important to say too, because even if you fall within that normal BMI range, let's say, you know your body shape, right? And if you would classify yourself as kind of an apple shape, where when you gain weight, it mostly goes to your stomach, it's okay, that's a sign of insulin issues. So that's important to remember, because sometimes women think that because they're not overweight that they can't possibly have insulin resistance, and that just couldn't be further from the truth. So insulin resistant PCOS. Those are some of the symptoms. And this is incredibly common. And there are some pretty simple ways of dealing with this. So primarily when we're looking at dealing with insulin resistant PCOS, we're looking at really where's the insulin resistance coming from? So androgens can cause insulin resistance, but primarily with insulin resistant type PCOS, we're looking at the insulin resistance causing the androgens. So there's another type of PCOS that I'll get to in a minute where it might be the opposite. But in this case, we've got somehow this woman has either a genetic abnormality that leads to her producing more insulin, or she has developed this insulin resistance over time, possibly because of diet and lifestyle factors. Sometimes I have seen this develop when women gain weight. And that weight gain, it may not be because you actually gained the weight that this has happened, but because of the set of circumstances that caused you to gain weight also caused you to to develop insulin resistance. So whether it was like an illness or something that you had to take a lot of antibiotics for, or, you know, a really stressful time period. In functional medicine, we're always looking for the antecedents and the crisis event. So where's the moment in time that your health started to spiral in the wrong direction? We're always looking for that. And that's why one of the things when you have a first session with me is basically spending an hour going over your history. Like I'm combing through your history to see, where did this start? Did it start when you were a child? Did it start after puberty? Did this happen as an adult? And I find that with insulin resistant PCOS, the women who develop this later in life tend to be the ones that it's easier to get to the bottom of. There's usually a diet lifestyle factor here. They kind of just don't know what they're doing with diet. Like they think they're doing the right thing, but they're maybe not doing the right thing. And that paired with just the fact that they already have insulin resistance, it keeps making it worse. They've got these excessive androgens. Everything's already in snowball mode, and they just don't know how to stop it. So all we really have to do is like turn the car around, and these women tend to like get their periods back. They tend to, I've had a lot of them get pregnant, have babies, not have to go through the whole fertility gamut, because it in a lot of cases it's lifestyle based, and we don't like to talk about that. I feel like now it's sort of taboo to say that, like, perhaps gaining the weight did cause some metabolic issues that then led to the development of PCOS. It's not super PC to say, but I've seen several women where that's the case. So it's worth looking at yourself and looking deeply at yourself and thinking about, is this possible that, like, if I look back at my history, was it after I had gained some weight that these symptoms started to happen and then they started to snowball? But keep in mind, there are many women who gain weight, right? And they don't develop PCOS. So there's still that underlying factor, that underlying genetic issue where the predisposition to that turns on. So there's room for some gray areas here. Then there's another type of insulin-resistant PCOS, and this woman is somebody who has dealt with this for a long time. And I tend to actually usually find this person fits more with the inflammation type PCOS, which is the next type. Because even resolving the insulin issues, which are typically, pretty easy to do with diet, because we know how to manage insulin with diet pretty well. So when we do all those things and it doesn't seem to make too much of a difference, that's when we want to look at, okay, there's probably some really deep issues here. And this is when I move to the second type of PCOS, which is the inflammation-based type. Now, I think it's worthwhile to take a second here and mention that this is just how I classify them in my practice. I mean, there are other practitioners who use this four types of PCOS model, but the way that they address working on PCOS is different sometimes than me. And the way that they think about PCOS sometimes is a little different from me. So I look at things from a root cause perspective. So I'm looking at the deepest possible issues that I can. And so while it tends to be said that the majority of women with PCOS are this insulin resistant type, my feeling on it, and this is just my opinion, my feeling on it is I think that most women with PCOS are actually the inflammatory based type, but it can parade as the insulin resistant type in a lot of cases. So, or at least, and this could be just because of the work that I do, and so the sample is skewed, but at least the majority of the women I work with are more the inflammation based type. So what are we looking at when we look at that? Inflammation-based type, we kind of start with looking at gut health issues, and these manifest in a lot of different ways. Like a lot of these women will have histories of some type of like IBS or diarrhea, constipation, gallbladder issues, these sort of like issues with digestion, skin issues like eczema, psoriasis, Autoimmune conditions even can sometimes be manifestations of gut health issues. I have a lot of podcasts about food sensitivities and gut health issues and autoimmune issues. So, you might think about, even if you don't have a diagnosed autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's or something like that, you might think about going backwards and listening to some of those podcasts about autoimmunity, because in inflammation type PCOS, there's kind of a similar starting point. In functional medicine in general, functional nutrition in particular, we're always looking at gut health. I did a live video with a friend of mine the other day where we were talking about gut health and how gut health is just sort of this like buzzword now. And it's kind of annoying. Like I don't like, when I got into fertility nutrition, when I got into studying this stuff, I always thought that I would be working with like herbals and things to like manipulate the menstrual cycle. And the more that I learned and the more that I practiced, the more I realized that really I don't do very much of that at all, because it's not necessary. What's really necessary is to work on gut health, because that's the crux and that's the base of the immune system, and that's the base of overall health. And so in inflammation-based PCOS, what we're looking at is what's causing inflammation, and what causes inflammation are immune system issues. Where does the immune system reside? 80% of it resides in the gut. So you see how we get from the hormones and the hormone imbalance, and we cycle all the way down to the gut. And that's why I ask about gut health issues. I ask about, diarrhea, constipation. Those are the most common manifestations, but sometimes gut health issues don't manifest as gut issues. Sometimes they don't manifest as, diarrhea. Sometimes they manifest as skin problems. Sometimes they manifest as headaches. Sometimes they manifest as brain fog. So that there are a lot of ways that this can play out. And that's one reason why it's so nice to work with a functional practitioner, because we know what things tend to mean what, and we can put the pieces together for you so that you don't have to do that work, because you have enough to worry about. Like, just farm that part out to a professional, right? So we're looking at inflammation, and when we talk about nutrition, nutrition is really good at lowering inflammation, because a huge source of inflammation for most people is food. Since most of our gut health is, correlated to our immune health, it makes sense that whatever goes into the gut can affect the immune health and can affect, by extension, inflammation. And what's the thing that we do in our guts more than anything else? Digest and process food. So that's why nutrition is such a cool tool for conditions like PCOS that have that sort of inflammation basis and that insulin basis, because those are the two things that nutrition really helps with, is like insulin and blood sugar balance and inflammation. And so that I often recommend, like, yes, I think it's super important to have a good team. It's important to have a good doctor. But I think when you have PCOS, and, of course I'm biased, to have a good, knowledgeable nutritionist on your team when you are dealing with PCOS. Because number one, it helps take a lot of the guesswork out of this. And I'm doing my best to give you as much information for free and as much education as I can. But I'm limited to what I can, talk about, just out to everybody. I'm limited with how customized I can get, obviously, on a podcast. So there are benefits to working with a professional in a condition like this that has such a deep nutritional basis. So inflammation-based PCOS, gut health issues, kind of the main indicators. Like if you ever eat things and it kind of causes stomach issues, that's a huge sign there. We're looking at like histories of different, gut infections. Maybe you had to take a lot of antibiotics when you were younger. Things that, history of like sinus infections, allergies, history of allergies, even seasonal allergies. Like if you get kind of bad allergies, asthma, there are a lot of different iterations of that. But whenever I see things like that, whenever I see, and the other type of woman that this is like super common with, I find, is women with inflammation-based PCOS. I find it's pretty rare for them to develop it later in life. So my experience has almost exclusively been, and like I said, again, this is not scientific because this is just my experience, but my experience has exclusively been that insulin only issues tend to happen in a certain group of women. And those are the only women that I've seen that have developed this later in life. All the other women that I've worked with that have always had PCOS, like since they went through puberty, they've had PCOS. Every one of them has had inflammation-based PCOS, in my opinion, just because they just have these like deeper issues that come from multiple sources, that come from, the food that they ate, that they were raised on. A lot of times there's like excessive estrogens going on here. There's deep genetic issues here. There's just a conglomeration of factors that's more deep than just insulin. And that's not to say that insulin isn't deep. I mean, obviously insulin's a hormone and it's super important, and the insulin resistance part of PCOS is really, really important. But I think sometimes we prioritize that and we focus on that at the expense of the other stuff because it's easier. It's easier to say, oh, all your issues are insulin issues because you don't eat well and you have, you eat too much or you eat too many carbs or whatever. And so you have insulin resistance and it's kind of your fault and that's why you have PCOS. And if you just ate better, then you wouldn't have PCOS anymore. That's the easy way out. That's the practitioner easy way out. Because if it doesn't work, then it's very easy to blame the patient and say, oh, well, you didn't do it right. In reality, PCOS is this complex system of things happening that oftentimes has much deeper roots. And we have to think about our approach as practitioners to say, like, are we really getting to the root here? If all we're doing is managing insulin and all we're doing is trying to like monitor the carbs or the glycemic index, are we really treating this patient the way that we could? No, I don't think so. So I'm of the opinion that insulin issues are not often the root cause. I think they're more a symptom of a greater underlying metabolic issue. And I often think that issue starts with that inflammatory basis. And, this is my podcast, so I'm just sharing theories that I have here. I know I keep saying stuff like this, but I want to be careful because I don't want to lead anybody in the wrong direction. This is just my theories that I've developed over working with lots of women with PCOS and, and my own issues as well. And kind of seeing how even when I account for insulin and for all this other stuff, how it doesn't resolve the problem. So yeah, I mean, and that's a huge frustration, I think, for women with PCOS too. And guys, tell me if this is true for you, but the frustration is not feeling heard, not feeling listened to, and sort of feeling blamed. It's almost like, with the whole problem with women who are obese or women who are minorities, and they go to their doctor's offices and they don't feel listened to, they don't feel heard, and we know from the research that those women get poorer outcomes. It's this whole victim blaming mentality. To just say that PCOS is the majority of PCOS is just insulin issues is just oversimplifying it, I think. So yes, the inflammation-based type does have a lot of insulin issues as well. I mean, they have both. But my approach is always to start with inflammation issues first if we've got an insulin-based problem. And, working on insulin does help with inflammation. So we can kill two birds with one stone here. It's not like there's like, and you're going to find this when I make the videos and talks about the different diet approaches for this. It's not like there's this, magical formula for like, okay, insulin-based PCOS, we follow this specific diet and we eat at this time, and we eat these foods, and then, we cure that. And then over here for inflammation-based PCOS, we eat these foods. It doesn't work that way. There's so much overlap with healthy diet and nutrition, and there's so much individuality and so much customization that needs to happen that it just doesn't work that way. But the good thing about that is that when we address one thing, we often address the other thing, right? So I like to start with those inflammation issues. So if you've watched those videos, or you've been listening to this and it sounds like, hey, like it sounds like I have both of these kinds of things going on. Like I identify with both things. I would start with that inflammation stuff first. And I'll get into that in another podcast about how I do that and what I look at and what tests I like to run. And even we'll go into supplementation at some point, all that stuff. I'd like to mention here too that I am working on putting together a PCOS kind of course, masterclass, whatever you want to call it. It's in process, but it's a way for me to disseminate this information in a very structured way with a format and meal plans and, supplement recommendations and all that stuff in a way that's a little bit more customized and a little bit more helpful than just listening to me kind of rant and talk. So, if you want to stay up to date on when that's coming out, and you want, more information about that when it's ready, it'll be ready hopefully sometime soon, and it'll go up for sale on my website and everything. But if you want to be a part of that and help yourself without having to work one-on-one with me, let me know. There's a link below, or there's an email address below where you can email me and I can keep you on a list to stay in the loop. Very informal here, but I just want, I want you guys to have the information that you need in as convenient and helpful way as possible. And, it's always been my goal to be able to help women of all, age groups, of all financial, aspects. It's expensive to see a functional practitioner. I get that. And so, I know it's out of reach for some women, but maybe they can, manage to afford, something a little bit less expensive, but that has just a little more kind of direction, I guess, than something like this. This is more informational. So I'm working on that. So let me know if you want to stay in the loop, but I think that's enough on the first two types. So let's get to the third type. And I'll mention here too that 20 to 30% of women with one of the other types of PCOS have symptoms from here as well. And so the third type is the adrenal type, and this is a very specific type. So the problem is that a lot of women have stress issues, adrenal issues, and you can have those adrenal issues and they can be part of the problem, but not the whole problem, not the root problem. And I find that generally for most women, they're not the root problem. And so if you're like on the fence or confused, my, advice would be to kind of look at the other two types more likely than this one as your root cause. I think this one's tempting to think it's your root cause because it seems easier to treat. It seems easier to deal with. So the adrenal type of PCOS, what are we talking about here? Well, the adrenals are these glands that sit on top of your kidneys, and they make stress hormones. One of the hormones is called cortisol, you've probably heard of. And these stress hormones, they're survival mechanisms. But they also can be damaging in too large of quantities. The body produces them as a protective measure. And so one interesting thing about adrenal type PCOS is that there's some thought that women with PTSD or women with like complex trauma histories and things like that actually produce these higher stress hormones as a way to mitigate the effects of long-term chronic stress damage on the body. So the body's trying its best. And we have to remember that too with all of this stuff. Your body is trying its best. Your body is resilient. Your body is trying to make it work. Your body is not the enemy here. We just need to push it in the right direction, because your body is basing its signals and things off of an evolutionary history that no longer really plays much of a role in the way that our lives are actually lived now. So the adrenal PCOS is a type of PCOS that develops because of these excessive stress hormones, and these excessive stress hormones then cause an excessive production of androgens. So one way that androgens can be produced is through the ovaries, right? And that's the typical mechanism with PCOS, where we've got these androgenic features like facial hair and all that stuff. But another way they can be produced is when we have too many stress hormones, they kind of get converted in. So there's some thought that this adrenal type of PCOS, right? What's happening is it's producing these extra androgens, and there's really no stopper for that. There's no feedback loop on that. And so they just kind of continue circulating. And over time, that buildup of those androgens then starts to affect the balance of the other hormones, starts to affect the ovaries, and it gets out of control. So interestingly enough, a lot of the women that I find with this tend to be on the thinner side, or, in the normal BMI range. And these excessive androgens can also cause insulin resistance. So sometimes we will see insulin resistant type features in this type of PCOS, but it tends to be it's like a chicken or an egg situation, right? It's hard to tell which came first. But a lot of times in the thinner women, or the women of kind of normal BMI, when this is going on, it's a little bit more obvious, I guess, because it often relates to a history of PTSD, a super stressful lifestyle. I've sometimes have seen it in women who run a lot. They're in the gym a lot. It's important to mention too that there is a type, sometimes this is misdiagnosed, and women are diagnosed with PCOS, adrenal PCOS, when really they have something called hypothalamic amenorrhea. And hypothalamic amenorrhea is a condition that occurs, primarily due to chronic undereating or chronic exercising, stuff like that. And that's a separate condition. That's when your period kind of stops altogether. And so, that needs to be ruled out as well with this. But some symptoms of, adrenal issues would be getting a second wind at night, not being able to sleep well, light sleepers, waking up with your heart pounding. And keep in mind too that the hormonal imbalances in PCOS, especially having excessive estrogen, if you've got estrogen dominance too, which a lot of women with PCOS do, also contributes to poor sleep. So sometimes we mistake cortisol issues here. And there's ways to test for this, doing a cortisol rhythm saliva test. If you are interested in doing that, there's a kit on my website that you can buy. There's also, Dutch testing, which is dried urine testing. There's, you can have blood tests done to see if your DHEA is high. But having these sort of sleep issues, these adrenal issues, these stress issues, these are present oftentimes with the other two types. But in adrenal PCOS, they're the precursor. And so sometimes you'll see women with this type and they don't have cysts on the ovaries. And, it's important to keep in mind that you don't have to have cysts on the ovaries to be diagnosed with PCOS, which is kind of funny. And there's talk about changing the name of PCOS because the cysts aren't necessary for you to have this sort of syndrome. But in most of the women I see, they've got cysts on the ovaries, right? And if they don't, or they sometimes go in and they don't, that's sometimes is more this adrenal type. That's just a little indicator that I sometimes see. But I think it's important to keep in mind, I never start my focus here unless it's just so blaringly obvious, because so often we are coming from a place where stress issues are part of the picture, but not the root of the picture. I like to harken back to something that I call the priority pyramid, which is this concept that I came up with to kind of help explain my approach and why I always like to start deeper at like inflammation and gut health stuff. I did a podcast on this too, so you can go backwards and listen to that. It's called the priority pyramid. But it's this idea that, our body has a hierarchy of things that it cares about. And the stress hormones, it's not stress hormones, the sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone, the androgens, it's not that important to the body. Because fertility is like the last thing, right? Like if we're not healthy underneath, the body's like, we don't need to be fertile right now, right? So when we see issues there, we always have to look deeper. And there are a couple rungs on the ladder deeper than that. And so there's the adrenal HPA axis, and that this is where we get into some of those like cortisol issues and stuff like that. But then even deeper than that is the inflammation and the gut health and the immune system. And so a lot of times we'll see that the gut health immune system is causing issues with the adrenals, which can then start causing issues with the hormones. But it can skip over, or not. A lot of times I see overlap with those things. So it's possible for this adrenal area to be like the start of things, but it's more rare. It's much more rare. And my personal opinion on it is that I'm not sure that that's really a worthwhile place to start for most women. So if you do think that you have like the adrenal type of PCOS, I would really consider working with a practitioner, because you can get yourself into some trouble with diet here. Because, if we do have adrenal issues, we really want to look at like stress on the body. And diet can be a stress. So, cutting back on calories, cutting back on carbs, things like that might actually be helpful for some of the other types of PCOS, could be damaging for the adrenals. A good nutritionist can try to help you figure out how to balance those things in a way that's going to be beneficial for all of it. Or to prioritize things, depending on how you respond, how your metabolism responds. So that's why that's important, of course. But yeah, I don't see that being like the main situation going on for most women, but it is definitely a type, and it's been studied and all that. The fourth type, and I won't go into a lot of detail here because this is not a type that I work with very often, because it's not really a type. It is a type, but it's not, is the post-birth control type. So there are some women who develop PCOS as a result of transitioning off of birth control. Certain birth controls like Yasmin, and there are some other ones, can trigger the production of androgens, which can then start this sort of PCOS syndrome where we can see polycystic ovaries and all that stuff. The key with the post-birth control type is that it is temporary. So if you never had PCOS symptoms, but you were on birth control for a while, went off of birth control, and now you've got androgenic symptoms and PCOS symptoms, typically the advice will be to just give it time, because your body, hormones operate on a feedback loop. So when something is high, other things go low to regulate it, and they're all trying to regulate each other. And the average woman who develops this post-birth control, her body is going to figure it out within maybe 6 months or so. So it just takes some time. It can be very frustrating in the meantime, but it just takes a little bit of time. I would keep in mind that if you had PCOS before you went on birth control, and you go off of birth control, and you find that PCOS stuff is back, this would not be a situation where I would just sit around and wait for it to possibly resolve. A lot of women have this misconception, partly due to misinformation out there, that birth control will fix their PCOS. It doesn't fix PCOS. It just sort of covers up the underlying issue. So you go off of your birth control and it's going to come back. Like all that stuff's going to still be there, waiting to be dealt with. So this particular type is more focused on women who maybe had normal menses before, and then went on birth control, went off of it, and now they've developed this PCOS type thing, and it tends to resolve itself. So yeah, that's the fourth type. So the conclusion of this podcast is to say that the focus of the next several podcasts is going to be on approaches for this and what I do in practice, what seems to work best for me and for my clients. And we're going to spend a lot more time on the insulin resistance and the inflammation than we are on other things. We are going to do some work on the adrenals too, but that's where we really want to put our focus. So I hope that was interesting for you guys. I hope that it helped make some things make sense. Hope it didn't confuse you even more than you already were confused. But if you have questions about this stuff, I love getting your questions. I love hearing your stories and your comments. Please feel free to send me an email at the email below and just kind of reach out and ask me your questions. And I incorporate a lot of the questions that I get into my podcasts. So, I'm happy to do that. And yeah. We may even start at some point in the nearish future. I've got a backlog of enough questions now that I might start a little question answer part of some of these podcasts, or do question answer podcasts, maybe once a month or something like that. So that's potentially in the works. I'm still kind of thinking that over. But if you do join my Patreon community, I also have I do monthly Q&As there and everything. So that's another way to do Q&As. And I'm also going to start going live on TikTok, maybe one evening a week, to kind of like field questions and answer what I can and stuff like that. So there are places to find me, ways to find me, but I love to hear your questions and I love to answer them. So please reach out. Let me know. You can find all the information for all that stuff and all the places you can follow me online below. And thank you guys for listening today. Thank you for coming back and listening to these podcasts over time. I really appreciate all of you. So, okay. Talk to you soon. Bye.